welcome to a new episode of Five-Word Questions. Our guest today is April Marten. April is based in New York and she's represented by Monica King Gallery. She works across media, including sculpture, performance, video, and more. And she tackles different subject matters, and she'll be discussing them with us today. Her work has been exhibited all across the US and is a part of many private collections. Welcome, April.
Thanks for having me.
So the first question is, how would you describe your creative process?
Usually my process starts with a question related maybe to a feeling or a word or a phrase that I hear, but I want to question. And so it'll basically start from this place of curiosity. And then I might find myself at a library doing research, or go straight into the studio and research by moving things around and touching material. And sooner or later, a sort of narrative develops, and I find myself transplanted into a world of my own making, where then I can really question what I think I know. So it starts with this question, but it goes beyond like the limits of language and inherited knowledge that we get through institutions.
Amazing. The second question is that love is a recurring theme in your work. So what is the concept of love for you?
Wow, that's a big question. Love is big. Like if you look up the word in the dictionary, there are 2 pages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, trying to define love, first with the noun and then with the verb. But for me, love is more about a capacity or a higher purpose, the ability to care. So it goes beyond any sort of cultural or romantic notions or a singular emotion. It goes far beyond that for me in the work. So when I'm thinking about love, it gets interesting and exciting when it goes past this idea of this capacity within and gets activated through outward expression. And so then like ultimately, like my art is a love letter to myself. It starts with loving yourself, self-affirmation, and then being able to turn outward facing and show that work to the world. Then I'm saying I have the capacity to love you and the world and all living things in it, even what seems unlovable. So it's big for me. And I don't think the dictionary captures it. I'm definitely playing with language and taking it apart and looking at it differently.
Expanding the dictionary.
Yes, absolutely.
You also tackle a lot of gender identity, and I feel like today more than ever, this is very important. After yesterday, the U.S. elected the first female vice president, which is huge. And so, what is your take on feminism, and do you consider yourself a feminist artist?
Okay, so feminism gets very tricky for me. Again, I like to stay away from self-limiting language, or like language as the arm of the existing power structures, right? Yes. So I get a little irritable when I try to identify myself under these umbrella terms that have been given to us. So I consider myself foremost an artist, right? And when you think about feminism, you have to think about where that word comes from, what's the history, who's using it now, and how are they using it, who's excluded when we talk about feminism. So that's why I try to stay away from it. I do, however, use a queer feminist lens at time in my work. I think that's the closest I'll get to claiming the word. And by doing that, I can really go deeply into my questions about identity by adding that that bridge of queer thinking or queer theory, for sure. But mostly, I have to say, I owe it to Merit Oppenheim. I found a book on one of her retrospectives in Germany and started reading about this artist who we all learn about, right, at some point in school when we think about feminist artists. She rejected that label completely.
Yes.
She rejected any labels with regard to herself as an artist. And if you think about how she was looking at Carl Jung's work around like androgyny, she talks about androgyny of the mind, animus and anima, and how like in one being, all that is masculine and all that is feminine exist. And that's what I'm adopting, is that androgynous mindset to move in the world as an artist and be able to be right up there with artists who don't even have to talk about identity and can just show their work and just exist in the world without any of these, isms attached to them.
Yes. So very good take on gender right now, definitely. And the fourth question is for you to tell us a little bit about your exhibit, Francis Wasn't a Saint, at Monica King's gallery in 2019, as well as the briefing room at Spring Break Art Show, which I actually had the pleasure to see.
Yes, great. So if we think about both of those shows pretty much happening back to back while I was in my third year of grad school, had a lot going on. Both start from creating a space or an installation where my body can enter and work with objects, art objects, materials, whatever I choose to put in these installations to explore a question. So for Francis Wasn't a Saint, there wasn't even a title for like a year.
Okay.
Basically, I went into this basement of a maintenance building in my university and created a space with a table and a light and some props and some costumes. And I had this question about like my family history and identity. And I was thinking a lot about my maternal grandmother, but I was also thinking about being in school at the time, this history of females using the camera lens as a way to question how they existed in the world. So I set up this camera on an interval timer and started basically this extended 3-week performance. I would just go in there and perform. And before I knew it, I was chain smoking during the cigarettes show up in a lot of the images. It was no longer me in the space. It became about a conversation with ancestral energy. And all of a sudden I got the answers to the questions I was asking, and I could see what it was that I needed to know. So yeah, go ahead.
No, that it must have been like a very, mystical experience.
It was. And I wonder if the tobacco had something to do with it. And then I've been thinking a lot about how tobacco is used in ritual in many cultures. And yeah, it was powerful. So getting those still images later and looking at them, I couldn't even look at them at first. It was so difficult because it wasn't me. It was just something bigger, right? Powerful.
And what about the little pieces of art that you had that were called unicorn cocaine?
Yes. So then you do? Okay, good. The Spring Break Art Fair came soon after my solo show, and I did an installation where it's basically a toxic paradise walled in by these plastic bags as lungs. And there's this noxious smell and sugary material all over the space. And basically visitors are coming in and consuming the antidote to a dying earth by acquiring the unicorn cocaine. And you have this singular figure off to the side, Francis, basically in this like contemplative headspace, this gesture of prayer. And you wonder, like, is she grieving? Is she saying a prayer? Like, is she hopeless? What's happening in this space? And there's a sign that says "You can love forever" on one of the walls. But it was interesting how people came in and became performance artists. captured somebody who was pretending to snort the unicorn cocaine, the antidote to the dying earth. So yeah, more installation, more making of art objects, and then creating this experience not only for myself, but for others to enter.
Amazing. And the last question, the fifth question is, what was the most challenging part of 2020 for your work, and what are your plans for 2021?
Wow. So right after spring break, I go back to school and I'm finishing my MFA thesis in time-based art while teaching online. All of a sudden, everything went virtual.
Yes.
And then I had to move. So I just was panicked. I didn't know how I was going to work. And I found a loft where I could live and work. So I'm basically living in my studio. Right. And I'm very thankful in 2020 that collectors were still buying work. And so I was able to acquire the equipment that I had at my university that I now needed to get on my own. So things worked out, but I'm basically living in my studio and looking forward to, yesterday, the inauguration. What a relief in some ways to think that possibly we're moving into a better space, a better world. But I'm very thankful again for people who are pushing our art out into the world. I'm in a group show, Anna Maras of Art Power Contemporary in Zurich, Switzerland. She put together a virtual group show. And then in the fall, I'll be an artist in residence at Monica King's new Artists in Residence project. I'll be the first artist with Alexandra Stone, one of her newly represented artists. And that'll be just lovely to go somewhere and be supported out of here to make work and possibly collaborate. So some things to look forward to, cautiously optimistic, and very much still keeping my ear to the ground as a human in the world to know what work needs to be made, what is my truth, my experience, and how that might resonate and maybe ripple out as love.
Thank you so much for joining me today on 5 Hard Questions. You can follow April on Instagram at April Marten. I'll leave you the handle below. And I look forward to seeing your future work, both from the project in Switzerland and from the residency with Monica King. Stay tuned for the next episode, and thank you again for joining me on 5 Hard Questions.